At this hour here on the Hill, the commander-in-chief on the world stage, honoring some of the bravest Americans this country has ever known, while warning about Vladimir Putin amid more threats from the Russian leader. While abroad, the president could not escape an uncomfortable family affair. The president saying tonight he would not pardon his son Hunter. Coming up, the legal drama that unfolded inside a Delaware courtroom. Plus, clues tonight about who Donald Trump could potentially select as his running mate. One of those names traveling with the former president right now for a major fundraiser. And is the hardwood about to meet Congress? How one Indiana congressman is now demanding answers from the WNBA about the on-court treatment of Caitlin Clark. Come on in, I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. And hello from Washington tonight. I'm Blake Berman. It is one of the finest and bravest moments in American history, D-Day. 80 years ago today on the shores across France. Decades later, images like these partly tell the story, but you can only imagine what it must have been like in the moment for those in their teens and early 20s at the time, sent into a surprise attack to take on tyranny with the goal of hopefully saving the world. Roughly 160,000 Allied troops landed on 5 beaches, including 73,000 Americans, arriving from 11,000 Allied aircraft and some 7,000 ships and boats. They faced around 50,000 German forces. More than 4,400, including 2,501 Americans, lost their lives on D-Day, and more than 5,000 were wounded. 80 years later, those men, the troops, honored.
I'm a here to. People say, what is a here to? I says, I'm here to tell you I'm not a hero. It's those guys up there that gave their life so that I could make it through.
President Biden among the world leaders praising the World War II veterans who are still with us, along with those who fell on D-Day in the days following and since the war ended.
What the Allies did together 80 years ago far surpassed anything we could have done on our own. It was a powerful illustration of how alliances, real alliances, make us stronger. A lesson that I pray we Americans never forget.
The commander-in-chief in Normandy, France, earlier today. Hanging out with us today here on the Hill, Daniela Diaz, Lauren Wright, Amisha Cross, Bob Cusack is the editor-in-chief of the Hill. Hello to you all. Nice to have you all in on what is clearly an historic day, a day that we commemorate, Bob, what happened 80 years ago. You know, President Biden, he's got 3 hats, right? Or at least 3 titles. He's got a lot of hats. But among his titles, he's the President of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief. He acted that way today. He's also the presumptive Democratic nominee for president right now in the home stretch of an election year. Did you get a sense that he was wearing those first 2 hats today? What was the eye toward November like on this day?
Yeah, and obviously a lot of people, including Mitch McConnell, backer of Ukraine aid, and people making the comparison between Hitler and Putin. And so it was a very interesting how he had to wear all those hats and had to touch upon both. He's thinking about his election, but he's also thinking about the historic day and what it means going forward. As he said, we can't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Putin was a big theme today.
Putin. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think that's going to continue. But listen, you can't avoid the comparison. And if also some Republicans are making it, then why not make it?
So, Daniela, you cover Congress. There was a big fight, as we know, about the funding for Ukraine. As we just talked about, Vladimir Putin was at the center of the president's speech today. I want to ask you about some of that. Here was President Biden in France earlier today.
We're living in a time when democracy is more at risk across the world than any point since the end of World War II, since these beaches were stormed in 1944.
Was it a bit of a told you so? A little bit of a, not spiking of the football, but the president saying, look, this is why I fought for this.
Absolutely. But the real question is that actually going to reach Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill, who a lot of them were fighting against Ukraine aid? I mean, this was the biggest fight the last year, maybe that and the speaker's race, of course. Right. Let's not forget that this has been a really busy Congress. But it's really Biden showing that this is why we do what we do and why we help other really important countries that are allies of the United States. And that's why this speech was so important, to remember that history can repeat itself. And that's what we heard from the president.
What'd you make of the president today?
No, I think she was absolutely correct in her analysis a moment ago, because the president had to do two things today. He had to showcase the danger that our democracy is currently in and democracies that we support abroad. But he also had to showcase to the American public why it is so important to support Ukraine, because we have seen in poll after poll some of that support wane, specifically as it relates to funding. So I do think that setting up that dichotomy, this is where we were, this is where we could be again, makes a big difference.
When you say danger to democracy, do you mean domestically?
Both.
Donald Trump? Both. Okay. So here was President Biden earlier today talking about evil, and I want to ask you about that on the other side. Watch.
Now we have to ask ourselves, will we stand against tyranny, against evil, against crushing brutality of the iron fist?
So just last week, Amisha, Jill Biden, the First Lady, she was on The View, and she said, quote, "The differences between them, the two men, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, I believe, is that Americans are going to choose good or evil." Today, we were talking about evil in the terms of what happened 80 years ago, Adolf Hitler, so on and so forth. Isn't that why we need to knock all this off, the evil stuff, and you're evil, this side's evil, no, that side's evil? Because we actually saw today a reminder of what real evil is.
And we've also seen it in rhetoric, and we've also seen it in plans and the propping up of dictators. I would consider that evil. I think many Americans would. When you see in former President Trump someone who not only has taken cues from dictators, but has no problem coddling them and pushing Project 2025, which we know has many cues that look very reminiscent of some of the things that led to what we just saw in those videos. I think that this dichotomy is real.
So, like, when I heard that out of the president today, I said, wait a minute, which evil is he talking about? Because I heard Joe Biden say evil.
Too sensitive to it sometimes.
To what?
To the comparisons potentially to Donald Trump. I actually thought it was a fine speech.
Okay.
I thought it was apolitical. I thought
You thought so?
It rose above the political themes, and a lot of these policies were never controversial even 10 years ago. I can disagree a lot with Democrats over the central theme they've chosen for the Biden campaign, which is democracy's at risk if you elect Donald Trump, which I don't think resonates at all with Americans. But that's not what he was doing today overseas.
So what did you make overall on the president?
I thought he was appropriately somber, treated the moment very seriously, and kept the focus on the history and the veterans that were there.
All right, joining us now is the Florida Congressman, Republican Brian Mast. He is a veteran and member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. So for those of us, for those who don't know your background, who are watching on NewsNation or listening to us on SiriusXM, you served in Afghanistan in 2010. You were on patrol in Kandahar. You stepped on an IED, an improvised explosive device. You were trying to clear the way for Army Rangers. You lost two of your legs as a result. And I wonder, Congressman, on a day like today, when we think about the bravery 80 years ago, I wonder, sir, what went through your mind?
No, I definitely think about the bravery. You showed an image of them looking out from a vessel, and you're looking out at this clear beach. And you think when you're at the beach, you can't get away from the sun. They couldn't get away from the hail of fire coming from the cliffs above. There was no place for them to get away from it. Their only saving grace would be how quickly could they advance, and the volume of their brothers in arms that were to their left and right. And to me, that reminds me of what stays the same from war to war, and that is your commitment to the United States of America and your commitment to your brothers to your left and right in combat. And now in today's military, your brothers and sisters to your left and right in combat. So that stays the same. Nothing you wouldn't do for either of them.
It's interesting, Congressman, that you say that. So the feelings and the belief, essentially, and the camaraderie and the brotherhood, all of that stays the same. But as we watch this video from 80 years ago, of surprise attack by boat, dropping in by plane by the thousands and tens of thousands, I don't think we're ever going to see that again, are we? And I wonder what you think the future of war looks like. I mean, nobody ever wants to see it, obviously, but it's sort of a new time and a new era. And I wonder what you think the future of fighting looks like if and when we ever get there.
There's a lot of conversation prior to me speaking about Ukraine. I was one of those individuals that absolutely pushed back against Ukraine funding.
Yeah,
it's because we see two very different commitments as it relates to conflict and winning war. Is there going to be strength and a total commitment to victory or not? And you were talking about the Biden administration. They're pushing Ukraine right now to say, don't use weapons against Moscow, against Russia proper. Only use weapons inside of the Ukraine. Imagine if it were World War II and that was the lack of commitment that we had. Well, listen, we know that you went into France. We know that you went into Belgium, the Netherlands, all these other places, Poland, but we're not going to go touch Berlin. That would be escalation. But that's the kind of weakness that you have coming out of the Biden administration. And you juxtapose that to a Trump administration, which is about your yes is yes, your no is no, and you're going to show strength on behalf of the United States of America, which is a bigger and stronger country than the rest.
What do you take issue with from the president today? Because he outlined why we need to stand behind and with Ukraine and why we need to address and take on Vladimir Putin. I mean, Vladimir Putin is pushing back on this idea that, maybe there could be attacks on NATO nations. There's a story out today about sending assets off the Caribbean. You're from Florida. I'm from Florida. The Caribbean's essentially our backyard down there, Congressman, and they're sending ships out there potentially. And so I wonder what you think the pushback on Putin needs to be and what it needs to look like right now.
The pushback needs to be on a number of different fronts, some of which we look at, but we don't do them in the totality that they need to be. Let's start economically and say, if you're going to sanction a country, you wouldn't sanction a farmer without sanctioning their crops. But we see Russia and Iran that may have a larger growth in their GDPs in this year than the United States of America does, because those sanctions are not sanctioning their oil and gas in the way that they need to be. That's something that America could be addressing, certainly with Iran and snapping back those sanctions on them, and certainly making sure that the ghost fleets of vessels that get Russian oil and gas to China, to other places, to Iran, is not taking place. Otherwise, their economy will continue to grow. They'll continue to be able to fund the war. That's the economic side of it. I spoke about the kinetic side of it already. Don't push back against Ukraine to tell them, hey, don't send ordnance into Russia. That's leveling the playing field. That's a total commitment to helping them get to victory. But right now, the United States of America is not supporting Ukraine to win. They're supporting Ukraine not to lose.
All right, Congressman Brian Mast from Florida. We have to leave it there. Hope you come on back soon. Interesting to speak with you and hear your perspective of what happened 80 years ago today on this day. Congressman, thank you. All right, 80 years ago, as we mentioned, D-Day changed the future of Europe. It was the largest amphibious invasion in history. World War II veterans stormed the beaches in 1994, gathered today to commemorate the anniversary. What they experienced to fight for freedom, as you might know, is remarkable. Here they are in their own words.
The celebration started when we liberated each town because they clapped. And it's been clapping and video, saying nice things all the way from World War II all the way till now.
I think probably this will be my last trip to Europe. But all my buddies are gone. All my buddies are waiting for me up there.
These guys are in their late 90s, maybe north of 100. They look fantastic. They sound amazing, and they are a reminder, Bob, of why the president went over there. And you got to be grateful for what they did. Oh, absolutely. And I've read countless books and seen so many movies on World War II. But to your point, you wonder, would we ever be that united again? Now, especially with TV and phones everywhere. Right. Listen, World War II, war is hell. World War II was hell. What America did to win that war, they did some bad things, but they won the war with the Allies. And I think their courage is just unbelievable. Can we show the picture real quick of the images of what they went through when they got on the beaches there? And I want to put it up on the screen. I'm just curious, around the table real quick, when you look at these images, and we've been ticking through them, what do you see? I'll start with Amisha.
It's bravery. I see men who didn't know what was going to be on the other side, but were willing to put it all on the line for protection of democracy.
I mean, you just have to think about the 70,000 plus troops. Eisenhower sent them in, and the first boats knew we're absolutely going to get killed. Right. We are opening the road for these boats behind us, and it's very emotional. We talked about it a lot on Morning America.
What do you see there?
I've seen so much footage in the last 24 hours from this day, and I just can't even believe the bravery of these men and the fact that a lot of them are back and, as you were noting, 100 years old. We're saying a lot of their friends are gone. That's the image right there that just showed, Bob. You have to imagine, as Lauren points out, when the hatch went down and what they saw.
It really is. I can't even really, obviously we can't relate to it, right. But just to try to get in their heads, they're heading for this beach. They know most of the people around them and themselves are probably going to die. Right. And they just kept going. Yeah. I mean, that's just remarkable. June 6th, 1944, 80 years ago today. By the way, NewsNation is taking a don't-miss trip down memory lane, highlighting the life of President Ronald Reagan. You can hear from the 40th president on the global issues like the Cold War, the space race, and the anniversary of D-Day.
Behind me is a memorial that symbolizes the Ranger daggers that were thrust into the top of these cliffs. And before me are the men who put them there. You were here to liberate, not to conquer. And so you and those others did not doubt your cause. And you were right not to doubt. You all knew that some things are worth dying for. One's country is worth dying for. And democracy is worth dying for because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. All of you loved liberty. All of you were willing to fight tyranny. And you knew the people of your countries were behind you.
On Saturday night, NewsNation Films presents Reagan, Portrait of a Presidency. You can relive the moments that have defined history. That is on Saturday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, right here on NewsNation. But before then, and coming up here on the Hill, has Donald Trump's vice presidential list been revealed? The names the Trump team is reportedly vetting. Mick Mulvaney, Trump's former White House chief of staff, will join us to share what he is hearing. Plus, would President Biden pardon his own son, Hunter, if it gets to that point? What the president is now saying. Jesse Weber joins us live as well. And we thought this might happen, and it just did. Why one member of Congress is now demanding answers from the WNBA over how players in that league are taking to Caitlin Clark. Does Congress need to get involved with this? And what does he want to know? You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation. Back in a few. Back here to The Hill on NewsNation. So in an interview today with ABC News, President Biden said he would not pardon his son Hunter Biden, and though he will accept the outcome of his son's trial. Again, a pardon, I guess, in theory, would potentially take place at any point if the president wanted to do it. Hunter Biden's federal trial on charges of illegally owning a gun entered day 4 today with the star witness Hallie Biden testifying. Now, Hallie Biden was the wife of Hunter Biden's late brother, Beau Biden, and then was in a relationship with Hunter after the death of Beau Biden. Come on in, Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. Jesse, these were interesting comments from President Biden today on the pardon. To be clear, we do not know the outcome of this case. It is ongoing. There will be a verdict one way or another. But as you and I were discussing off air the other day, President Biden doesn't have to wait for an outcome of this case to pardon his son, right, if he wants to, though he says right now he's not going to do it anyway.
There's no political or legal benefit for him to do it right now, right? So I think what he's going to be doing is taking the position, as presidents have done in the past, I'll wait for the case to play out. And look, here's the deal. There's a strong chance Hunter Biden's going to be convicted. The evidence against him is very strong. Yeah, I think this is a really straightforward case. I think if you're trying to establish whether or not he was abusing drugs and was an addict at the time he ultimately purchased the gun, the evidence is pretty strong. There's some creative arguments being put forward by the defense. Hallie Biden today says she never witnessed Hunter Biden abusing drugs at that time, but she also said right after he purchased the gun, she found remnants of cocaine and drug paraphernalia in his car. And this is just one bit of it. So I think he's going to say, listen, I let the process play out. He's not going to be sentenced immediately when that sentencing happens. 2, 3, 4 months afterwards, if that happens, right? Right. So then... And so that brings November into the equation. Again, these are all ifs, but that butts right up to November. It's about the election. And I think it's about allowing this process to play out. And ultimately, I mean, I think this is going to be a case where you're seeing the building blocks of it. He said the other day, the president, but I'm also his father. You're seeing Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's attorney, saying this is politically motivated. It all seems as a justification if he ultimately wants to pardon his son, which I don't think a lot of people would blame him or be surprised by that.
He is the president of the United States, and as he pointed out in his statement, he's also a father.
Yeah.
Right? And all of that.
And real quick, Blake, if you're going to pardon somebody, this kind of case, which we've talked about before, if his name wasn't Hunter Biden, you wouldn't have brought the charges. Again, I think it makes sense.
All right, Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. Talk to you probably tomorrow. Thank you, sir.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
So the president, Bob, was asked about this earlier today in France, as we just talked about. This is the answer you kind of have to give now, right? The question is, as I just laid out with Jesse, if there's a conviction and then a sentencing, sort of what the president may or may not do then, before, and then after the election.
Yeah, I mean,
it gets really sticky.
Right. He's not pardoning him right now, and he's not going to pardon him. And listen, he could get acquitted.
Correct.
I know.
None of this is. Yeah, there's a trial.
Know. But Biden, the president, has defended his son. He's stood by him. So I think that's just for now. And as you know, Blake, people can change their minds.
Yeah. Here's a story that I found interesting in your publication. Suddenly, Trump's got nothing to say about Hunter Biden. I remember, where's Hunter, like all the time with Donald Trump. He hasn't said anything about this for the most part, Danielle.
Yeah, my colleagues reported that Trump's been, and his campaign has been notably silent on the developments on Hunter Biden, really different from last year when they were commenting on everything. I mean, I think they're aware that they have probably bigger problems to worry about. I mean, he was just convicted a week ago. They are really going in on the executive actions that the Biden administration has put forward on
immigration.
We're going to get to that
in a second. Donald Trump
they're trying to focus on different things that they think could resonate with voters rather than Hunter Biden, which they don't see really making headway with voters on that issue.
Amisha, Lauren, let me ask you both about the polls, because we've been waiting to see sort of what the backlash may or may not have been to the guilty verdict, right? Some New York Times polling out voters react to the Trump verdict. It's margin of error stuff. It used to be Trump +3, now it's Trump +1. There's a poll out in Georgia, Quinnipiac University, Trump +5 in the state of Georgia. Did voters kind of just shove this off to the side?
Well, and they have been for quite a few months now. I don't think it will have any impact on the election. It's probably the least serious, not saying it's not serious, but of all of these charges.
He could still go to prison, by the way. Like, the judge hasn't...
Very unlikely.
Very unlikely,
of course. Very unlikely. And a lot of this is baked in, and voters are just more concerned with other issues. In every poll we ask them about their top priorities, Trump's legal troubles, Hunter's legal troubles, nowhere to be seen.
Real quick, what do you make of those numbers?
I think everyone knew that they weren't going to move a lot, quite frankly, because there is no real fervor around. There wasn't real fervor around this case. It was a case that the Americans couldn't even see, to be honest. It wasn't televised. It was also one, and I agree with Lauren's point here, it was one that was seen as the weakest of all of them. This wasn't the one about, election interference in the sense that you were actually trying to, have ballot places moved, or that it didn't make sense to a lot of people. The other part is, at least in the battleground states that you just showcased, Trump has consistently been in the same position. Nobody really expected those things to change.
And the numbers seemingly, at least for now, just an early look, not moving much. Again, margin of error type stuff. All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. Do Democrats want to see Donald Trump in jail? It's a headline right now on Bob's publication, thehill.com. I'll chat with Bob. He's the editor-in-chief, by the way, of The Hill. Did you know that? About how lawmakers are handling the issue. And joining us on the other side of the break, Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House chief of staff. Hello, Mick. What does Mick make of the candidates that... Hello. Donald Trump, as Mick knows, is starting to now vet some candidates. What does that look like? Who he's vetting? What is Mick hearing about it all? We'll take Mick's pulse of it. Other side of the break, you're watching The Hill. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. So this afternoon, the former president, Donald Trump, campaigned in the battleground state, border state as well, of Arizona. Trump went after President Biden's border security executive action.
Biden's order is not a border security plan. It's a concession to the fact that he has lost control over our border. He's totally lost control over the border, and it's a really dangerous place.
Come on in, Mick Mulvaney, for Hot Mic with Mick, that time of the day. Mick, of course, the former congressman, budget director, White House chief of staff, tells us what he's hearing, what he's thinking. All right, Mick, Trump on the border there with Donald Trump. What'd you make of Trump on the border? What'd you make of what he said, and what do you think we're going to get out of him here over the next 5 months or so now that President Biden has done what he did?
Yeah. Oh, there's no question you're going to hear border the whole time. Keep in mind that the election's really about the three I's: immigration, inflation, and Israel. And you're going to hear Trump talking about this again and again and again. What really interests me, Blake, as much as the content, was the location. This is Phoenix, Arizona in June. I mean, it's 174 degrees there. They give a pretty good crowd, and they've got polling data out today that says that Trump is up by 5 in that state. He's going to go to New Mexico over the weekend. There's some polling data says he might even be leading there. I'm not sure if that feels a little bit overly optimistic. There's also some polling that has him tied in Virginia. We'll put that aside for another day. But the fact he's in Arizona, the fact he's in New Mexico, he's going to be talking about the border, but he thinks there's an opportunity here to continue to pound this message in the desert Southwest, even in the summertime, which I got to tell you is an aggressive play from a political standpoint.
Immigration, inflation, Israel, the three I's. I hadn't heard that yet, but that sounds spot on. All right. On the campaign trail, Nick, Trump, of course, in Arizona today at a town hall event. Joining the former president on his plane ride, the Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. Notable, as you know, Mick, because the senator is reportedly one of 7 potential vice presidential candidates to get vetting paperwork from the campaign. This is a thing that everyone does, both sides of the aisle. You try to get information on folks in case you want to choose them. That list includes the North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Ben Carson, the Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, the Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, and the New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. What do you make of that list, sir?
I'm 3 for 4. I mean, I got 3 of my big names on there. The only one that didn't make it was, oh goodness gracious, the Secretary
Linda McMahon.
Thank you very much. I hate getting old, Berman. It's absolutely crushing.
I got a milestone next week. I'm not looking forward to it. Go on.
Are you 30? Is that what you're going to be next week? Is that?
No, I wish. Proceed as you were.
Look, you're going to continue to see this play out. We've talked on this show for 6 months about this. Donald Trump is going to continue to try and use the media attention that we're giving it, and rightly so, as long as he possibly can. My guess is you won't see a final decision until right before or even at the convention. I still think that the 3 leading candidates out of those 7 are Tim Scott, Elise Stefanik, and Ben Carson. Ben Carson's still at the top of my list because he's the only person on there who really doesn't probably want to run for president or be president. I think Doug Burgum still ends up at the Department of Energy. He's sort of the Trump 2.0 version of Rick Perry. There's no reason to take J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. He's learned some really, really good lessons in the past about special elections in a tight Senate race. He put Jeff Sessions in the cabinet back in 2017 and then immediately lost the special election to replace him. If it's a really tight Senate, I think the chances of taking a senator go down dramatically. And of course, we haven't talked about the fact that Marco Rubio is from the same state, and one of them would have to move.
So, Mick, stand by for a second. Show that list for a second, because it just struck me as I was looking at it. We had talked about Donald Trump needs a woman, or might need a woman to run. There's only one. I see 6 men and 1 woman on that list, Amisha. Not to say that is the only list or the final list, but we've been talking for months about maybe he needs a woman to sort of combat the abortion argument. I only see 1 on that list.
Donald Trump months ago said that he would choose a woman, but, Donald Trump's mind changes all the time. But I do think he's also trying to neutralize for the black community Kamala Harris and for other people who want to see diversity. This list, I don't think, is exhaustive. Donald Trump will also change his mind. I agree with what we just heard, because I think that he's onto something. Donald Trump, it does not make sense for him to name or call out anybody right now. We see where he is in the polls. He doesn't necessarily need them to drive up, at least by the polling standards, in the battleground states. Right. So I think he's going to wait until the convention, and honestly, it's going to be somebody who will not bring too much shine to themselves on that ticket, because Donald Trump wants to remain the star.
So, Lauren, before you go, just show the statement real quick. The Trump campaign, Lauren, basically saying no one knows what Donald Trump is going to do except for Donald Trump, and I can tell you from covering the White House every day with him for 4 years, that is spot on. But what do you make of the list?
I don't think he needs a woman. I think he needs a non-MAGA person and a moderate person. And I don't know if anyone on that list is exactly like that, but it just needs to be someone that makes swing voters comfortable enough that they can say, I think this person's policies are better than Biden's policies, and let me, sort of hold my breath and vote for this person that I think is extreme on some things. But look, he chose someone who's less extreme than he is.
Real quick.
Yep.
I've been told to keep an eye on Ben Carson because
That's Mick's pick.
Yeah, I completely agree with Mick. He is someone that is kind of seen as more of a quiet candidate for this, but could be someone that really supports Donald Trump. And also that comment about he does not want to be president, that could be something that helps the former president try to be president.
Mulvaney, Daniela's in your corner for a second there, but let's move on. Today, a judge ordered that the former Trump advisor, Steve Bannon, must surrender to a 4-month prison sentence by July 1st for defying a subpoena from the House committee that investigated the January 6th Capitol attack.
I want to say something specifically about the Justice Department. Merrick Garland, Lisa Monaco, the entire Justice Department. They're not going to shut up Trump. They're not going to shut up Navarro. They're not going to shut up Bannon. And they're certainly not going to shut up MAGA.
Mick, what went through your mind when you saw this?
This was probably a foregone conclusion as soon as Peter Navarro went to jail, because it's essentially the same charge. And Peter Navarro was even closer to the president at the relevant time than Steve Bannon was. Keep in mind, Peter Navarro was inside the White House. He went to jail for contempt for defying the January 6th committee subpoena. And Steve Bannon did almost exactly the same thing under the same circumstances, except Steve Bannon was further outside the orbit. So under the thesis that Peter Navarro has to go to jail, then Bannon has to go. That doesn't mean it's right. In fact, I think Steve Bannon has a legitimate complaint that his appeal, which is currently pending, won't be heard before his 4 months is up. So he's appealing this decision, but he's going to have to go into jail pending the appeal. That's what the hearing is about today. And the appeal won't be heard for 4 months, which means he's going to serve the 4 months anyway, even if he wins on appeal. And I think that's a legitimate claim. But as soon as Peter Navarro went to jail, we pretty much knew this was going to happen to Bannon.
Hot mic with Mick. Mick Mulvaney, thank you, sir. Hope to catch you tomorrow. Appreciate it, bud.
See you soon.
Yep, you got it. All right, meantime, Donald Trump also facing possible prison time, as you know, for the 34 convictions, felony counts in New York. The question is, do Democrats want the former president actually to go to prison? Now, our friends at The Hill asked several Democratic lawmakers up on Capitol Hill this question, but most didn't want to say anything publicly. Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill.
Yeah, this was a fun. Alex Bolton, Michael Schnell up there, both talking the Senate and House Democrats. And listen, I mean, Democrats, as we all know, have been dreaming of Trump in an orange jumpsuit for many years. But most of them are dodging it or saying, hey, we'll let the process work out. There are exceptions here and there. Lloyd Doggett said, Democrat from Texas, said, yes, he should go to jail. AOC said, well, hey, let's have the legal process. I know there's separation of powers.
You were on the Sunday show when Eric Swalwell was sitting there with us.
He said the same thing.
I asked him 2 different ways, and he basically said everyone should be treated equally.
Right. And there are some Democrats who we've talked to who said, listen, if you send him in jail, you make him a martyr. And then the potential for violence in this country increases. So I don't think he's going to jail.
It's kind of wild that Hunter Biden is on trial right now and Donald Trump is saying nothing. And Donald Trump has been convicted and Democrats are saying nothing. It's because all of this is happening all at the same time.
I know what Trump will break that silence if Biden's acquitted.
And of course, we'll see if President Biden breaks his silence and says it to Donald Trump's face, you're a convicted felon at the debate. All right, coming up here on The Hill, she is all the hype right now, or at least in some circles. Caitlin Clark, one of the biggest rookies ever to hit the court in women's basketball, but now one member of Congress is calling foul on the WNBA. Do you think Congress really needs to get involved with what is going on with Caitlin Clark? What does Congressman Jim Banks want? The Hill on NewsNation. Back in a few.
Saturday.
We have made a new beginning, but we have only begun.
Reagan, like you've never seen before.
Tear down this wall.
Reagan, Portrait of a Presidency. Saturday, 9, 8 Central on NewsNation.
Actually caught the attention of Congress. The Indiana congressman, the Republican Jim Banks, has sent a letter to the WNBA asking the league to take action to protect the Indiana Fever rookie. Now, it follows a series of hard fouls from her opponents, what some are calling a form of rookie hazing. Now, in his letter, the congressman writes, quote, since joining the WNBA, Clark's exceptionalism has been met with resentment and repeated attacks from fellow players. He goes on to say when Caitlin Clark plays, more people watch. And what they are seeing right now is a league that refuses to hold hostile players accountable and enforce their own rules of sportsmanship. End quote. Amisha, holding you back on this one. Go.
It's just really frustrating because the Johnny-come-latelys of the WNBA, the folks who are just now starting to watch, have not seen true rookie seasons. Caitlin Clark isn't getting boxed in or, bobbling around like other than anyone else who has been in their rookie season. You're playing against the best female basketball players in the world. Yep. They're going to challenge you. You're going to take hits. Her team isn't protecting her, I will say that. Right, yeah. So she's flopping around a lot. But it is not any more aggression than any other rookie has taken coming into this sport.
So on the sports side of it, this happened with Michael Jordan when he came in, right? And then the NBA progressively sort of loosened up the rules over time, and now you can almost argue it's gone way too far on the basketball side.
This is happening with Angel Reese right now, and she's also in the same rookie class. She just happens to be a black woman, and this is a majority black league, so they are trying to offer some type of white protectionism for a player who's getting a lot of attention, and deservedly so. She came out at the top of her game going in.
You think it's white protectionism, or it's what the congressman said, which is she's the star, people are tuning in to watch her, so you might want to protect her a little bit.
She doesn't even she's not even the top scorer in the league. We've seen this before. There have been stronger rookies than her who've gone through this process. However, she's going to take the same hits and tumbles as anyone else who's challenged coming into a professional league. This is not Indiana. Welcome to the big leagues, sis. This is how they play.
So, Congress just got involved with this, with Jim Banks. Does Congress need to get involved with this?
Love the attention.
That's what this is, right?
Oh, yeah.
With Jim Banks jumping in.
Any celebrity, anything popular, yes.
Does the WNBA have to respond to him?
No.
No, right?
He doesn't. They don't. I mean, it would be different if it were multiple members of Congress, some leadership that were saying something about Caitlin Clark's situation. But right now, I mean, they don't have to say anything. But we are talking about it. I think it worked.
Where was he when it came to WNBA players' pay? My question is, there was a huge controversy around the amount of pay WNBA players have. Mm-hmm. That was one of the reasons why the majority of them also played multiple seasons abroad.
Right.
If you're going to have that argument, then that's something you can stand on. We're not seeing that happen. The only reason Caitlin Clark is here where she is because of her strength and her talent, but also because of all the NIL deals, which did go through Congress. And we saw a lot of money that was being made for college players there. If he wants to step in, focus on making sure that these women are paid equitably.
By the way, speaking of stepping in, tell the folks at home what the congressman is doing.
He's running for the Senate.
He's running for the United States Senate. And what is he doing?
And he's going to win.
He's taking the back of the biggest sports star, or one of the biggest sports stars in his home state.
It's smart politics for him. And I do think it's great that we're talking about the WNBA. I made a wager on the WNBA the other night. I won it.
Okay, there you go.
Sports Talk Radio is now talking about the WNBA.
Yeah,
That's all good.
It's good all around. All right, meantime, the NBA Finals between the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks begin tonight, but there was some other sports excitement, massive news in Dallas today. A huge win for the United States, get this, in cricket. The Americans upset the international powerhouse, and they are the powerhouse, Pakistan, in the T20 World Cup in Dallas. It is being called one of the biggest upsets in cricket history. An estimated 200,000 people play cricket in the U.S., but potentially, it could get a bigger following because of this. Go USA, go. All right. Meantime, the former President Donald Trump just wrapped up his event in Phoenix. We were talking to Mick Mulvaney about it a little while ago. But right before finishing his remarks, Trump was asked about food inflation. And he had some props and a demonstration. Watch.
Tic Tacs. This is what inflation does. This is what inflation
I'd heard this. I hadn't seen it. He's a showman, but that's the argument. That's what he's going to do, is he not, down the home stretch here?
And he's creative, and that gets attention, and that's what Biden needs to be. I don't see a lot of creativity coming out of the Biden campaign. That's a good move.
Is it creative, though, when Biden has shown how, our bags of chips have less chips in them than they did before? He's had
this is the other side of it. Biden's talked about shrinkflation. This is the other side, which is inflation.
He mentioned it in his State of the Union address, and then people made fun of it because he kind of stumbled on the Snickers line, and that wasn't even in the prepared speech. So Trump, I guess, pulled off the Tic Tac demonstration a little better.
By the way, one of the things that I love about this show, or at least doing it every day, is that I learned something from smart folks like you and the guests who join us. Mick Mulvaney said something. I don't think any of us had heard of it. And as wait a minute, during the commercial break, I asked all of them, I go, you heard what Mick said? He said this election comes down to the three I's: immigration, Israel, and inflation. You all think that's spot on. It's the three I's, and Donald Trump just hit on it right there. Is it basically just that? That's what we're looking at?
I mean, I think that's what voters care about. They feel, their money and how far less it's going they feel immigration and the security at the border and that problem. And then Israel and Hamas has been one of the biggest foreign policy issues, even more for a lot of voters in Ukraine. So it checks out.
Mick is very smart. Don't tell him I told you that. But
he should trademark that, by the way.
He's missing one letter. A, abortion.
For down, yes.
For yes. But for Republicans, those three I's. And if we're talking about those three I's down the stretch in the fall, Biden's in real trouble.
The A-triple-I, maybe?
Doesn't have as good of a
ring as the three I's?
No. Well, I mean, the problem for Trump is me, myself, and I. Because when he makes the election about himself, then he's not going to win an election that's really his to lose right now.
We'll see what we learn tomorrow here on the Hill. But before then, coming up, a shelter or a stash house? Why the state of Texas is now questioning the work of a Catholic leader who helps migrants. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins us on the other side of the break. You are watching The Hill here on NewsNation. All right, before we say goodbye, here's a story that caught our eye. A network of Catholic shelters in El Paso, Texas, called Annunciation House, is facing major scrutiny by the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton. He is trying to shut them down for housing undocumented migrants. Now, Texas officials argue that, quote, Annunciation House appears to be engaged in the operation of an illegal stash house by potentially allowing others to use its real estate to engage in human smuggling. Now, a report in the Washington Post says a judge in El Paso blocked the initial subpoena, and now the shelter wants the judge to make a decision. Host of On Balance, Leland Vittert. I'd heard the term stash house before in other forms, but never in this form.
Never in the form of a Catholic charity?
Yeah.
We are going to get to a point where attorney generals of states are quickly becoming, maybe we already at this point, of essentially becoming political actors and carrying out legal action based on policy and based less on law. And that's what this is. I think you can make you can make a salient argument that having shelters set up to sort of encourage people to come, or if the shelters do encourage people to come, is a problem. And that's what they're going to do.
It's interesting how you say that you could view them as essentially political actors, and you're right. Remember the Ticketmaster suit? That was Democratic and Republican attorneys generals, and when something like that happens, it's rare and it catches your attention. It did mine at the time.
You got scared.
You got Hugh Hewitt coming up on the show?
Hugh Hewitt coming up on the Veep Stakes.
Okay.
We're going to sort of turn it around, not who he should pick, who he shouldn't